Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Governor Jacoby, Chief Justice Beeney, distinguished legislators, program participants, and guests. What a privilege to be back in the company of participants in a program which has given my life the direction it has taken over much of the past 50 years as a part of civil society, professionally, and in my worldview. But first, this from a farmer, poet, political theorist, humanist, Wendell Berry. If you remember nothing else from these few minutes, remember the name Wendell Berry. It won't be the last time you hear it. He was, in his strength, the most feeling and the most demanding man I have ever known. I knew at first only the difficulty of his demand, but now I know the fear in it. He has been afraid always of the loss of precious things. We live in time as in hard rain and have no shelter, half hopeless in anxiety for the young, half helpless in compassion for the old. The generations fail and we forget what we were and are. The earth even is floating away. And where is the stay against indifference? I know his fear now by my own. Precious things are being lost. We all make decisions and they have consequences. We have chosen, each of us, to be here today. And I will argue it was a good choice, a right choice, that will make a difference in each of our lives and in the world we are building together. It reflects the influence of mentors already important in our lives and values we have begun to integrate with the persons we are becoming. If I were not here this morning, I would be just finishing a 5-mile march from Peekskill, New York to the gates of the Indian Point nuclear plant, owned and run by Entergy Inc., which is operating the plant under an expired license. The installation is well past its sell-by date and is, with increasing frequency, breaking down, spilling radioactive wastes into groundwater and river, and threatening the lives of 20 million people who live within a 50-mile radius of Buchanan, New York. I live 5 miles away in Rockland County. The march was organized by the Japanese Buddhist from Grafton, New York, a few miles east of here, on the 5th anniversary of the catastrophe at the Fukushima plant in Japan. The Mihoji Nippozan have been staging such demonstrations around the world for more than 60 years, since the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which occurred even before I was born. The intended recipient of the message to close the plant is Governor Cuomo, the agents of New York State, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and FERC. Here or there, the goal today is to influence, by protected and time-honored means, those who make the laws on behalf of the common good, which only serve us when we understand how the laws work and then use them. I'll come back to this briefly in closing. More than 50 years ago, I sat at this banquet as a participant from the Maplewood branch of the Rochester YMCA. Anybody here from the Maplewood branch of the Rochester YMCA? As part of the Charlotte High School Youth and Government part of High Y. I was relishing the fact that my bill, allowing motorists to make a right turn on a red light if there were no traffic, had passed. It is a moment of continuing pride that, though my bill may not have been consequential to the outcome, the idea did become law in New York State and virtually all of the states in the nation. I was motivated in part by the thought that a great deal of energy was used when automobiles idled at red lights, waiting for them to turn green. The environmental motivations have only deepened over the years since then, as the Indian Point story illustrates, and as you will hear in what follows. One thing leading to another, as it will, I parlayed my appreciation derived from my youth and government experience of the role and practices of shaping policy to serve community needs into a number of subsequent ones. I served for many years on the board of the Adirondack Nature Conservancy and as president of the Lake George Basin Land Conservancy. Activities in these areas led to my appointment by Governor George Pataki to serve as the chair of the Lake George Park Commission. It also probably didn't hurt that the Patakis vacationed at the Silver Bay YMCA Conference Center, where I was the executive. This is to make the point that my youth and government experience was important to what became a 37-year career with the YMCA. That this experience has the potential to help define your future employment and careers. During my tenure at Silver Bay, charging staff such as Laura Seco Sandow and then Mark Rutkowski to manage youth and government programming in Ticonderoga schools, yes, I'll take some credit for recognizing the talent and quality of leadership that was celebrated last night in Mr. Rutkowski's career. During my tenure at Silver Bay, I was invited to join Fritz Simonson of the New York City YMCA in creating a judicial branch for this program. Well, the youth governor had a cabinet and there was a modest press function already in place. The addition of a judicial branch was the beginning of a significant expansion in the roles and number of participants, including the lobbying function that followed. These changes, thank you. These changes provided a more robust understanding of the complexity of government practice and allowed larger numbers of participants to have more active roles in the program. I also maintained an interest in the New York State Youth and Government Program because my 3 daughters were involved. I wonder how many of you had mothers or fathers who were in youth and government, brothers or sisters. Drew, stand up. Let me see a show of hands. Mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters. This is a developmental moment. Thank you. In addition to its value as civic education, the program also gave me and my daughters the confidence to speak in public, to clarify our positions, to be persuasive. I'm confident that you have also found that to be true for you already. We're gathered here to honor the name of the founder of this program, Clement Duran, a young Spanish immigrant to the United States early in the 20th century, who early in his career with the YMCA, he started at age 17, and as a reflection about his adopted country as a naturalized citizen, felt that Americans lacked a clear understanding of how Republican democracy, small r, small d, worked, and the perilous threat of such ignorance. We should today celebrate the expansion of the program within New York State and beyond its borders to the entire country and abroad. And we should also be explicit, as this year's program comes to an end, that an awareness of the ideals of democracy place a responsibility on the shoulders of those who do understand it. I should not need to go into any great length or make overly explicit observations to remind you that in the context of the current presidential campaign, you now have an extraordinary responsibility to vet candidates for their understanding of constitutional government, governed by elected representatives, and to educate your peers and your elders on its principles and practices. You are called to action beyond the parameters of this program. You are called to protect precious things. Today I'm one of a small number of individuals who represent the International Fellowship of Reconciliation at the United Nations with what are called ECOSOC credentials. There we continue to try to shape the global abolition of nuclear weapons, amongst other causes. I serve on the boards of international faith-based organizations and environmental groups like Interfaith Moral Action on Climate, as well as science-based groups committed to addressing the threats of climate change by building resilience in the global human population. These activities illustrate my belief that the most important issue of our age is climate change and how we prepare ourselves socially, economically, and politically to deal with its impact. I mention these roles again to suggest that they can all be traced back to my early exposure to the roles and responsibilities of citizenship in a democratic society through the YMCA and the grace and vision of Clement Duran, and that they might inform you to understand that the work of preserving the vision and promise of a democratic society is founded on government principles, but also on our continuing right and responsibility to resist the abuse and misuse of governance by practices of dissent. You do need to know why and how government functions as it does, to know also when it is right and necessary to resist its abuse and misuse. The power of critical thinking, critical analysis, and the role of citizen advocacy under the rule of law in New York and the USA knows no limits when our collective well-being lies at its heart. Now, let us lift up the service of those who have best embodied Clement Duran's vision in this year's program, and thereby further them and each of you in your commitment to these ends. Namo myoho renge kyo.